Welcome to another week of Yes Minister. Now this week we're looking at the issues of cuts, austerity and the long history of civil service reform. Now of course over recent years there's been a lot of talk about austerity and significant cuts to public sector spending, and this has put a lot of pressures on the practices of the civil service. But of course there's a much longer history of public debate about the appropriate role of the civil service in British life. And you can get a good introduction to this debate on the website policy.manchester.ac.uk, and for contemporary debates about civil service reform I particularly recommend the Institute for Government website. So civil service reform really goes back to the mid-19th century and the Northcote-Trevelyan reforms, which try and establish open competition for civil service places and the introduction of a meritocratic service. However, we see further reforms, particularly after the First World War, with the Haldane Report of 1918. And in some ways, the background to this report is that there's been a significant expansion of the role of government in British life, particularly during the First World War, when there's a great deal of pressure for Britain to develop a significant munitions industry. And also as well, I think at this time there's also a lot of anxieties in Britain about potential relative decline in relation to foreign competitors such as Germany and the United States. So the Haldane Report tries to introduce a more effective partnership between ministers and civil service officials. We see significant attempts to reform the civil service in the 1960s with the creation of a committee under the leadership of Lord Fulton, which reports in 1968. Now Fulton's interesting because he was the first Vice-Chancellor of Sussex University, which was one of the leading new universities created in the 1960s, and which attempted to offer a radical modern curriculum which gave more emphasis to the social sciences and sciences. Now with this background, Fulton emphasised problems of lack of expertise and professionalism within the civil service, and particularly not enough attention being paid to the sciences. So in many ways he was influenced by the Two Cultures controversy and the ideas of C.P. Snow, which we've discussed elsewhere in these videos. And I think these debates about civil service reform also influence some of the content of Yes Minister. As we've discussed before, obviously Sir Humphrey is this Oxbridge-educated classicist, with Jim Hacker, by contrast, being someone who's a reformer and is taught in a polytechnic. So here we have a clip from Doing the Honours in 1981, which looks at some of the issues of the role of elites within British life and problems of reforming the public sector and civil service.
Of course, in the service, CMG stands for Call Me God. And the KCMG for Kindly Call Me God.
What does GCMG stand for?
God Calls Me God.
Why should Sir Arnold worry? He's got his full quota of honours, hasn't he?
Certainly not. Nowhere near. There's a peerage, the CH, the OM, the Order of the Garter, the Knight of the Thistle,
Knight
and...
of the Thistle? Who gets that? Scotsmen and donkeys?
There is a distinction, Minister.
You evidently haven't met the Scottish nationalists. How do they award the Thistle?
A committee sits on it.
Does Humphrey really think that I shall change government policy on university finance on the strength of a dinner at high table?
Well, I believe Bailey College give a very good dinner, Minister.
How much further?
Oh, a few minutes. This M40 is a very good road.
So's the M4. I wonder why we got two really good roads to Oxford before we got any to Southampton or Dover or Lowestoft or any of the ports.
Well, nearly all our permanent secretaries went to Oxford, Minister. And most Oxford colleges give very good dinners.
Now, when this episode was being produced in the early 1980s, Margaret Thatcher was making significant attempts to reform the civil service as part of a wider challenge to practices within the public sector in British life at the time. So we see there's this long history of civil service reform over the last century or so. So these seminars will give us an opportunity to think about why civil service has been so difficult to reform and what has really changed and what has stayed the same over the last century or so.